Some of you recognise that thing up there. It all started with that thing in our churches. Some of you recognise it? Good. 1950s to 70s. But what was the point of the table tennis table? That's a key question that I had when I reflected on all of this. What was the point? And it's a point where most churches started. Whatever stream of denomination, that's where most churches started. And the key word that I want you to remember, the first word in the 10 minutes, is association. Association. How were we associated? Primarily through that thing. I grew up with that association model in the late 1970s and early 1980s. That's where some of our youth work began. That's where some of the significant conversation happened with significant adults around that table tennis table. Anybody still use the table tennis table? There you go, so I'm starting somewhere right. Open youth work model. Crowded house, so to speak. Everybody crowded in, chaos. We weren't sure what we were doing, but we were doing something. We were doing something. Number 2 word. Evangelization. Evangelization. When Mrs. Thatcher came into the post, we need to just think of the soundtrack at the time. We need to think of the Billy Braggs of this world and what was going on in those eras as well, because actually the social history that goes on, the church was responded to at the time as well. Evangelization. We started off with our good old beach missions. How many of you have been to a beach mission in your life? Scripture Union Beach? Yeah, don't be ashamed. Be confident. And then we went to house parties, and there's one in Worcestershire called the Gaines that I went to as a nipper. And then Spring Harvest came along and disturbed all our peace. Do you remember? Tower Beach, Prestatyn, 2 sites. It was all happening back in the day. We were getting some new songs back in our churches. And Trouble at Mill. Churches were being rent asunder because of the charismatic movement, etc. We were seeing some new kinds of youth work. We weren't quite sure what we were seeing, but we were seeing something. And then a friend of mine there, Jill Rowe, she embodies, I think, Oasis Frontline, where young people started to participate in projects. They started to engage. And there was a real British focus then. Don't know whether you noticed that. We didn't quite have the Americanisms we have now. Do you notice that? It was very British. A very British affair, so to speak. People like me weren't quite featured. Just thought I'd say that in the running. Then we got to the professionalisation stage, of which Dave knows all about it, because Dave can recognise his Jedi there at the top. I wanted him to just realise where he was coming from, his formation. Mr. Pete Ward. And then he's King's College London. But in the heart of it all, you had Oxford Youthworks, which was the beginning, the start of the professionalisation movement. We needed to know what was it we were learning and why were we associating? Why were we evangelising? What was this all about? So we became providers of learning, and there was a growth of these. We wanted to feel good about ourselves in the midst of our wider communities. We thought going for the grade of the JNC was the be-all and end-all of everything, and we wanted to go for it. So we wanted parity of esteem. We wanted to be, like they say in the Exodus narrative, like the other people. Like the other people. And then there was an explosion of employed workers in our churches. So professionalisation, 1990s to the present. Then we had the globalisation vibe. We're in a global community, everybody, even if we're here in Stoke in Guildford. And I want you to just think about where we position ourselves globally with our youth work, because our youth work is now global, whether we like it or not. Why? Because of these things that you've got called smartphones that Dave's flickering with. We've got global influences. But are they really global influences? Are they? Notice the branding. Soul Survivor, a big branding in the diocese that I serve in. You've got the TED Talks, the model that we're doing today. Hint, hint. Youth specialties from America. We've got all our social media outlets that we're doing. Use the hashtag today, by the way. It's useful. Let other people know what you're doing. Branded ministries. The lenses of youth ministry, however, doesn't seem so global to me. I would argue that it's very Eurocentric, it's very Anglophiled around English-speaking nations. We don't live engage in Europe, so Farage and Clegg, eat your heart out. And there's fragmentation. There's fragmentation. The fragmentation is coming about how we engage. And with the rise of social media, we're having to ask ourselves some fundamental questions about how we engage, who we engage with, what's the nature of our humanity, what do we look like to the outside world, what does the world of young people inhabit, which is so much different from us today. So globalization, the third word. Personalization. This, I think, is where we have got to in our journey of youth work. This is where I hope we might get to in our work with young people and families. I think there's a big debate going on right now. That is not just about youth work anymore. It's about intergenerational work. Being the whole family of God. Hence the brand down the bottom on the right, Messy Church. And it manifests itself in these three or four ways. There is mentoring and peer-to-peer relationships. I am constantly reminded that the most significant adults in youth ministry today are probably grandparents, folks. They are not necessarily the youth worker. Sorry to upset a few youth workers in here, but it's the significant adults who accompany that are quite key. And grandparents are taking a heavy load in relation to be the significant adults for most young people. Every time I go out and I talk to young people, who is the most significant adult in your life? They don't say their parents, they say their grandparents right now. And why is that? Because parents are too busy trying to chase the grail of money, etc., keeping the show on the road. The grandparents are doing the childcare and doing everything else around. We need to tap into that, what's going on there. That's a cultural shift. Then there's the peer-to-peer engagement. Young people tell the story to their own generation. We need to just equip them to do that. How we do that's another story. That's part of what I call the personalisation agenda. Then we need to reevaluate relationships, and we need to look at inclusion and diversity. We have not been good at doing this. We have not been good at doing this. We're going to have to relook at it. And I'm not just talking about ethnicity, although I'm an embodiment of that. I'm talking about hidden disabilities, ADHD, autism, all those issues of those young people who we're going to need to engage with. Most of the young people with hidden disabilities are rising to about 14%. Do you know what's going on in that world? Have you equipped yourself ready to share amongst that constituency of young people that is an integral part of us? Just asking a question. Diversity. It's not just the gender thing. We get hung up in the church about gender issues and human sexuality as we have done in the last few hours. I'm not here to credit the rights or wrongs of that. I'm just saying, do we need to be aware of what's going on, as an old song says? And then there's the rise of the intergenerational ministry debate. And that whole thing about, is it children's ministry, is it youth ministry, is it families workers? We have a plethora of diversity of job roles and titles. I think it comes down to, excuse my Anglican ecclesiology, what does it mean to be the community of the baptized? What does it mean to say, I will, when you do confirmation vows and baptismal vows? What does that look like? And then the final thing is discipleship. We're grappling with it. I don't think we've got there yet. I just think we're grappling with it. So in closing, when I look at this whole thing about a long, hard look at youth work, I think we mustn't believe our own hype. That's the first thing I need to say. I think we've just got to be honest about where we are. Davey said something earlier, and I'm going to paraphrase it by a wonderful song I listened to, a reggae song. The further you look, the lesser you see. I think we need to take a deep look around at our communities, a deep look around at young people who are not there in our midst. We look a lot to the young people that are in our midst because we maintain and we hold on to them. That's not a bad thing. But sometimes we're going to have to look out and be missional. And as we go back to that Exodus narrative that Dave talks about, what does it look like to rescue? What does salvation look like for young people that are not even in our view? And have they got a cat in hell's chance with the life raft that we saw from the Wren Collective video? Where's that life raft going and to who? I'm done. 10.